a brown, Pakistani, Canadian Muslim woman. And let me just say, man, I love my culture and my ethnicity. I love Pakistan. I will sacrifice my life for Pakistan. Like, man, being brown and South Asian is just so cool. I can't imagine representation of us being bad. I mean, what could go wrong? Yeah, okay. Growing up, I don't remember seeing much South Asian or brown representation in Canada, and I'm sure many North American South Asians and brown individuals probably relate. I never saw people that looked like me as a main character in any media, let alone as a supporting character. The only piece of media I can really think of is Aladdin, and hey, Princess Jasmine? Icon. That does not, however, mean I can ignore how obviously stereotyped she is, especially visually. I also, to this day, don't know what her ethnicity is. Like, she's also voiced by a white woman. Like, the interesting thing is, I haven't seen or heard much about racist or ignorant forms of representation for South Asians or brown people for Western media, but man, have I for East Asian media. And what especially caught my eye was South Korean forms of pop culture. I couldn't help but wonder, why is brown representation still so awful in South Korea? Sure, it's not perfect anywhere around the world, but South Korea's depictions really shock me, especially since the country itself is so well educated, but doesn't show it through expressing other cultures. That's what we're diving into today. Brown and South Asian media representation in South Korean media. There's actually a specific manhwa Korean comic that inspired me to do this topic, and you're gonna see it soon. But we gotta pay attention to past media and influences first. To start off, South Asians defines individuals that come from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Afghanistan, Nepal, and Bhutan. I'm gonna say this right now, misrepresentation with my ethnicity and skin color is bad everywhere. Even in media where brown and South Asian people are born and raised in. It's bad. Representation of brown and South Asian individuals has been pretty damn awful in the media I grew up in, mainly the westernized stuff. One of the overdone tropes with South Asians is always having a white savior, and with the brown person ending up with a white person. A lot of these examples are from older pieces of media. Western media has actually improved. Never Have I Ever shows really great character development for a brown girl making it through high school and ends up really liking her culture. Bridgerton, even while in a predominantly white area and ending up with a white significant other, still showed a lot of beautiful anecdotes together of Indian culture, like the bangle dropping, the yellow cream, playing Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum in the background, turning red, having a brown character who felt like a real tween who has curly brown hair, a nose ring, saying she can't go to a concert till she's 30 was also very on brand for a brown daughter, and it's honestly refreshing. Even though it's slow, it's progression nonetheless. But what intrigued me the most about South Korea as a main focus is because of how it progressed with representation of those outside of East Asia versus how, for example, Western media has. At the top of my head, K-pop appears in my mind when it comes to this. K-pop has never been fully Korean, if that makes sense. Like many genres of pop culture, Black culture has been a long time influence on K-pop in general. One of the first K-pop bands to ever exist was so heavily based on Black culture, where one of the members of said band created YG Entertainment, which is a huge well-known K-pop company, which is also infamously known to be obsessed with Black culture. I know the focus of this video is for brown and South Asian individuals, but I felt it imperative to demonstrate how South Korea has an intriguing take on representing other cultures than theirs through their own work. Could be because they just want to be trendy and go with whatever the West is doing. That's just a guess though. South Korea's way of representing us in the media has been a ride. I think the best form of media that represents brown people pretty respectively is Ali Abdul in Squid Game. He was a great representation of a brown Pakistani man, saying this as a brown Pakistani girl. He was not another exotic, barbaric, dark-skinned character that was dominant and cruel. He had a family he loved, a good heart, and always helped others when he could. This also makes for good Muslim rep, as Islam promotes this kind of behavior, for it's good not to be selfish and think of others before yourself, doing what the man can to provide for his family. And no, we're not going to get into how awful, and I mean awful, Islamic rep is in the media, because it's not the main study of this video, and it will also make this video 3 hours longer and I will get a headache. You know what's not good rep? This. I'm gonna try my absolute hardest not to rage about this, by the way. I remember coming across this manhwa and being like, OMG, wow, a brown lead, so cool and amazing, let me check this out. I was then stabbed 57 times. The male lead is, unfortunately, every male brown stereotype you could think of, being mean or rough in bed, violent tendencies. I decided to read it to see if maybe I was jumping the gun, since the last time I read it was like months ago and I only read like the first 10 chapters, and I revisited it and I wasn't. Also, yeah, this manhwa is what really made me want to talk about the South Korean rep of brown culture, because like, oh my god, I've seen really bad rep of South Asian culture in East Asian media, okay? But this was like the last straw. The manhwa Predatory Marriage by Hera, original story by Saha, is about a fair-skinned princess named Leia, who one day meets the king of Kirkins, Isha Khan. After being thrust into a terrible circumstance, Princess Leia decides to commit one more act of retaliation against the royal family by becoming an impure bride, aka premarital sex. The greatest evil there is. A complicated and powerful dynamic arises when the male lead, with whom she had a one-night fling, reappears and falls madly in love with her. Also, I don't even know what ethnicity Kirkin is supposed to replicate. Kirkins are brown and are heavily stereotyped here, and boy are we gonna get into that. And you know what? I think if you aren't brown or South Asian, you may be thinking this is not a big deal, or that it isn't deep to see us misrepresented yet again in media. One of the main arguments I see for when a culture that is very much similar to mine getting negative attention, in this case the Kirkins in Predatory Marriage, it's usually that since this is a piece of fiction, or more so a fictional race and ethnicity, this appears to be a non-issue. For example, King the Land, a popular K-drama starring Im Yoon-na of Girls' Generation, major popular band, and Lee Juno of 2PM, also major popular band, had an Arab character who also played Ali Abdul in Squid Game, who portrayed all the stereotypical ways in which Arab men would act. A player with all the ladies, a womanizer, drinking with them. The actor isn't even Arab or Pakistani, by the way. He's Indian, which is well, that's a whole other bag of marbles worth losing over. This was deemed as highly offensive by many Muslim, Arab, and Middle Eastern viewers. Keep in mind that this is not an old K-drama either. This is from like 2023. At the time, the production team noticed the havoc fans were spewing and stated, the characters, regions, place names, etc. appearing in the drama are fictitious settings, and there is no intention to satirize or distort a specific culture. This shows that there isn't really much of a care for proper representation. Rather, our kind can be portrayed however others wish, cause it's just fiction, right? There can't be more to this than what's seen, right? For as long as I can remember, whiter skin has always been the standard. No matter where you are, where you're from, this hierarchy is hard to miss. Let's take a bit of a history lesson, shall we? With the economic growth of Japan, China, and South Korea, along with the heavy influence K-dramas and K-pop has globally, it is heavily believed that whiter skin is the way of life. In South Korea, colorism is ingrained in social networks, job markets, immigration, and other organizations and systems. Colorism is a structural norm rather than only an individual bias, since policies and societal expectations favor lighter-skinned people for skilled jobs, social acceptance, and upward mobility. Everyday encounters, the media, and societal narratives that elevate lighter skin tones all contribute to the perpetuation of colorism. These norms are internalized by both residents and immigrants, who then socially and psychologically reproduce them. A very common example is seeing ads or products that reinforce this idea often. But what started this? Or at least influenced this idea? Let's get pre-colonial with it.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is correct. Colonization is yet again the root of the problem.
Like many countries around the world, imaging racial inferiors are what brought upon how Koreans view darker skin. Having racist ideals mostly based on colorism has been a long time form of how Korea solidified their way into the modern world. Many centuries ago, the idea of excluding people of color, including blackness, Indians, and yellow races, was the civilized world for humanity. That's how the article phrased it, by the way. I mean, because they were talking about past times in all fairness, so like please don't cancel me. And even though Predatory Marriage isn't set in a modern timeline, South Korea still feels strongly on their form of white supremacy. When Europeans started differentiating themselves from non-white populations throughout the global South in the late 15th century, the Age of Discovery gave rise to this racial hierarchy, which places those of white, frequently European lineage at the top. Black people in particular were unfairly classified as intrinsically inferior during the 19th century, as this differentiation was explained and institutionalized internalized over time. These Western ideas of racial superiority were unquestioningly accepted by Korean intellectuals, especially during the late 19th century modernizing phase. Early modern Koreans intellectuals quickly embraced these Western imperialist racial hierarchies, which reinforced the inferiority of black and non-white people while cultivating admiration for perceived white racial superiority. 독립신문 was a term used to enhance the idea that East Asians, of all people of color, were superior and the closest to the whites, imagined as the racial superior, and it looked downward onto American Indians and black Africans in particular. In the past, there was a ranking system put into 3 sections to describe the superiority of each ethnicity. At the top were the US, France, England, and Germany. They were seen as the most enlightened nations. The second were Korea, China, and Thailand as the second half enlightened, leaving Africa and other nations as non-enlightened and cannot escape from savagery. Even if the story tries to make Leia seem like the less ignorant character towards Kirkins, the white savior structure still mirrors the old colonial justification that civilized people must rescue or discipline primitive ones. We can see that this narrative doesn't just appear in fantasy, it has a long real-world history that helped rationalize empire, invasion, and racial hierarchies. This is a framework that justifies oppression and hierarchy, devalues brown and South Asian identities, and pits communities of color against each other in a false competition of racial value. This is also the case for South Asia too. There has always been a preference for lighter skin, even in areas where having darker skin is quite normal. Bollywood, for example, portrays actors and actresses with fair skin as ideal, attractive, or morally upright. Characters with darker skin tones are sometimes shown as less successful, less attractive, or ethically dubious. Colorism interacts with gender and class in addition to skin tone. Darker skin is associated with rural roots, poverty, or lower social position, while lighter skin is linked to urbanity, modernism, affluence, and better social status. Colorism and brown stereotyping are systematic, long-standing issues. These groups are continuously at the bottom of a racial and social hierarchy, reflecting historical notions of civilizational ranking, connected to skin tone and perceived closeness to whiteness. Older kinds of racial prejudice are echoed in stereotypes that depict South and Southeast Asians as unskilled or inferior, and these biases are reinforced by structural systems including labor markets, immigration laws, and social interactions. It's emphasized that colorism and brown stereotyping are part of persistent international patterns of racial inequality rather than being isolated or recent problems by placing local prejudice within a larger global racial order. This is crucial to take into account since stereotypes also support colorism, which has long-lasting psychological, social, and economic repercussions by favoring lighter skin and penalizing darker complexion. Negative media representations uphold a global hierarchy of race by marginalizing dark people in all nations and cultures and elevating whiteness as the ideal. The history, the hierarchical ideas. This shows how a story like Predatory Marriage portrays darker skinned characters. And boy, are they brave in how they do it. Cultural criminology looks into how cultural forces intertwine with practices of criminality, along with its cultural practices in contemporary society. Because it highlights how culture, representation, and media and power co-create what is perceived as normal, deviant, civilized, or dangerous, the methodology created in cultural criminology is especially helpful for comprehending why something like predatory marriage matters. Deviance must therefore be viewed as cultural and symbolic processes that are ingrained in meaning, representation, emotion, power, and identity, in addition to being legal or structural events. Collective meaning is shaped by culture, including media, literature, visual art, symbols, aesthetic codes, cultural tropes, and public discourse are used to negotiate what is other, dangerous, desirable, and civilized. Consequently, when a popular media work, such as a manhwa, consistently depicts a particular group, coded as brown, dark-skinned, foreign, and barbaric, in a violent, sexualized, savage, or exotic manner, it contributes to the creation and perpetuation of social meanings about that group. This is why I mentioned King the Land earlier, to support this idea since that drama is very popular. Cultural criminology also highlights the power dynamics at play, who defines civilization, beauty, danger, desire, and fear, and how those definitions mirror prevailing norms that are frequently white and Eurocentric. Crucially, cultural criminology examines representation, moral panics, stereotypes, stereotypes and cultural othering, even in romance or fantasy as components of the same symbolic machinery that creates social difference, deviance, and hierarchy in addition to avert crime and deviance. Therefore, from this kind of perspective, predatory marriage is not just a romance fantasy, rather its portrayal of Kirkins as savage others is a significant example of how the media constructs and sanctions racialized difference, normalizing prejudice through narrative and aesthetic conventions. The born criminal concept, which links physical or genetic characteristics to criminality, is a product of Lombrosian philosophy. These scientific arguments are made emotionally vivid and culturally relevant by the Gothic's use of imagery and narrative devices. Monsters, curses, contaminated bloodlines, dark races, and lands. When combined, these provide a cultural toolkit that is used to justify monitoring, containment, and punitive measures against some groups by portraying them as intrinsically dangerous. This explains well enough what happens in this manhwa. Ishikan is seen as rowdy, he is violent and enjoys beating others up. He, probably more sarcastically, calls himself an uneducated barbarian. Kirkins would go through dangerous means to get what they want, even if it means to abduct someone into forced marriage. He basically accepts the label he's given, since it's all anyone says every time he and his people are in Estia. And Kirkins are quite literally considered half-beasts. Lombrosian and Gothic fusion also introduces bestialization. The Gothic monster cliches found in Lombrosian discourse are echoed in the manhwa when people are described as beastly or cursed, transforming a social group into a biologically or supernaturally threatening other. Prejudice is both aesthetically pleasing and justified by this. The manhwa's plot, forced and unwanted marriages, rescue by a male lead, punishment of barbaric groups, can be interpreted as a narrative logic that normalizes dominance. Only when a group is portrayed as dangerous by birth or blood, interventions, so coercive marriages, exile, violence, read as necessary or heroic. This proves that pop culture is one of the primary locations where individuals learn to link particular groups with risk, and criminology demonstrates how potent and detrimental such associations can be. This is why media like predatory marriage are important to analyze, to discuss. Contemporary concepts of dangerousness were historically constructed through a combination of Gothic imagery and pseudoscience that depicted oppressed populations as inherently violent, cursed, or monstrous. The manhwa inadvertently perpetuates the same logic of social control when it uses comparable cliches such as exotic darker-skinned people, using monster or cursed imagery, or portraying particular ethnic coded groups as intrinsically dangerous. And these specific terms like barbaric or animalistic aren't even used to make the bad guys of the story seem worse or snobby or arrogant, not to make their appearance worse. If that were true, then our heroine of the story or other supporting characters wouldn't use this language either. The same discourses of racialized danger function in real life, influencing how people of color are criminalized, punished, or killed because their bodies are perceived as dangerous before they do anything. It focuses on the effects that implicit biases and representations have in the real world. Teaching Trayvon, for example, reveals how comparable racial scripts function in daily life, influencing policing, public dread, and the imprisonment of Black adolescents. Pop culture creates racially dangerousness through fantasy exaggeration. In addition to depicting conflict, popular culture portrays some bodies as inherently violent, cursed, or less human, such as predatory marriage does numerous times. These representations function as covert kinds of social control. Narratives of dominance, surveillance, or rescue seem legitimate when entire groups are portrayed as hideous or animalistic. According to this theory, fiction shapes audiences in its perceptions of who poses a threat by acting as a sort of soft criminology. For example, the act of a predatory marriage in the manhwa is more than just abducting the bride. It also involves making them an impure bride. So, meaning to, sex. And the Kirkins actually do this in order to be with other people outside of their kind, and are stuck with the label of being barbaric due to it, even though there are times when there isn't an actual predatory marriage happening. Like how Leia was fine with staying in Kirkin with Ishikan. Even though she was taken, it was still with her consent. She wanted to be taken. But because the civilized people can't accept anyone being with a Kirkin, it's still a stigmatized label. This only enhances the racism. Although fantasy media such as predatory marriage may appear innocuous, it repeats a long-standing historical pattern that scholars trace back to Lombroso. But not the civilized bodies. Oh, no. No, look at how small and fragile the people of Estia are. Aw, they're so tiny and skinny. Aw. I don't even know. I really didn't know if I even wanted to add this in here, but so when Kirkins get married, There's the mention where Kirkins, especially Ishikan, have a large amount of stamina and Ishikan, rough in bed, big strong Kirkin man. And it gets comically worse because on his and Leia's wedding night, he's gonna freaking unleash the beast, if you know what I mean. And he's gonna get more animalistic. So animalistic that Leia is expected to somehow gain more energy because he's gonna have no self-restraint that night. And it's apparently worse if there's a full moon out. If this is a kink of yours in general, whatever, I'm not gonna kink shame. But it's only the dark-skinned people in this fucking manhwa.
I need to calm down. Everything's fine.
Amanda.
I'm an adult.
This pattern includes gothic tropes, animalization, cursed bloodlines, and exotic darker skin groups. Cultural criminology explains why this is important. Fictional portrayals of barbaric or monstrous people influence actual public perceptions of who appears suspicious. This is because popular culture is a major place where societies learn the emotional codes of fear, deviance, and threat. Teaching Trayvon illustrates the practical repercussions of such cultural scripts, showing how racialized youth may be perceived as dangerous before they act. When combined, these texts show a spectrum where racialized danger is created by pop culture fantasies, cultural meanings turn those images into felt realities, and social institutions act disastrously on those presumptions. This ideology also leads to the idea of the white savior complex. The white savior complex is typically discussed in context of global circumstances where wealthy, white Westerners are thought to have significant and long-lasting effects on the foreign communities they are helping. We see this a lot in all kinds of media with people of color, and it's especially noticeable with brown love interests. This is a tactic shown in the manhwa, where Leia is seen as better than the rest of the rich, high and mighty characters, since she's the only one willing of her kind to help Kirkins from being slaves. And she's even had some herself, but hey, she left them in good condition, and she shut down the ways in which she owned these slaves, so she gets a pass. She also did save Ishikan when he was a child, so yeah, heavy on the white savior complex here. The Daisy Crit framework goes against the racist hierarchical ideas. The darker coded groups are not allowed complexity, self-determination, or moral nuance. Their only narrative function becomes to threaten or harm, so that the lighter skinned characters can heroically intervene, rather than a person who acts independently. For example, Ishikan saying, "Can I kill him?" or them, relying on Leia's orders for if he can be barbaric or not. Works that frequently depict darker skinned communities as threats in need of a civilizing hero contribute to implicit prejudices, particularly with regard to Middle Eastern, South Asian, and other racialized individuals. This all backs up the more general criminological trend. The white savior structure implies that only the dominant group can restore order to disorder, just as Lombroso and Gothic findings historically designated racialized people as intrinsically dangerous. These cultural norms have actual repercussions. Institutional violence against colored adolescents is portrayed as protection, while they are frequently viewed as dangers. Predatory marriage depends on racialized fantasy tropes that portray South Asian, Middle Eastern, and brown-coded groups as dangerous, illogical, or culturally backwards, repeating Asian Orientalist prejudices that consider these cultures as monolithic, uncivilized, or intrinsically threatening. South Asian coded characters are dehumanized and deprived of agency and complexity by this narrative logic. Therefore, the world-making of the manhwa perpetuates the very racial presumptions that depict South Asians as being outside of reason, modernity, and moral validity. South Asians are frequently viewed as either model minorities or foreign threats, making them invisible or misinterpreted within racial classifications. Instead of addressing actual experiences, predatory marriage maintains its Orientalist illusions by reproducing the danger side of this duality. While the manhwa unintentionally perpetuates these degrading narratives, the Daisy Creep method seeks to undermine them. This asserts that we brown South Asian people are persons, not stereotypes, whose voices, experiences, and identities must be understood on their own terms, rather than via racialized dread, in contrast to everything predatory marriage and other media like it want you to think. What makes analyzing this comic the most upsetting is how it's actually not even bad plot-wise. I found the artwork incredible, the storyline intriguing, and it kept me hooked. And even though the male lead is, to put it lightly, a character. He was still a good guy. Morally gray, more like it. And the writing made me want to know more about the characters, how they were gonna get their happy ending together, and if the world they were in would be more accepting of the Kirkins. And the manhwa even shows much later on that, yeah, the Kirkins are violent. They are hypersexual. However, they're also not bad people. They just want to be with their loved ones. But man, the racism and the fetishization. Oh. I want to say that the racism portrayed in the manhwa is necessary because those that aren't Kirkin are racist towards them, calling them violent and barbaric and blah blah blah. But the comic highlights that this is simply the nature of Kirkins. They can't help it, it's in their blood. And of course, the ones with beastly blood just had to be the exotic people of color that live in a desert. And that idea isn't just in fiction, which makes it upsetting and uncomfortable to witness. Was it really necessary to make the people of color the ones to act like animals? Also, I refuse to be that person that's like, oh, well, actually, we can't look at everything with a critical eye. It is so important that we do for the literal reasons I've been talking about for the past like 20 minutes. I will never fall for the propaganda that claims some stories or pieces of media out there can't be political, that they simply have no meaning, no reason to be taken seriously or to critically analyze. Saying this also belittles artists or writers in general, including the author of Predatory Marriage, implying that they don't know what they're doing or that it wasn't planned out. Like art in general, everything is political. Books, movies, shows, music. The manhwa does a good job with showing gender differences and inequalities, beauty standards such as fat phobia, and it is decent at showing how the bad guys who are lighter skinned and privileged see people of color as just exotic or barbaric. Man, I've been saying barbaric and exotic so much throughout this video, but believe me, it's necessary. However, this is still a very white woman kind of feminist way of portraying a story. Post-feminist media culture is built on ideas of individualism, choice, empowerment, and the self-surveilling subject. Nevertheless, these ideas overwhelmingly center white, non-people of color as the universal subject of empowerment. This framework produces a media environment where the lighter-skinned woman's feelings, safety, and liberation are foregrounded, while racialized others are positioned as obstacles, threats, or narrative tools. The white person is still making the big decisions. Misrepresentation of brown people works to reinforce this default, portraying them as backward, dangerous, or in need of intervention, so that the white woman can appear strong, moral, and modern. There's a fetishization of choice and freedom here. When brown cultures are represented as oppressive or barbaric, it makes the pale woman's choice to escape, intervene, or judge those cultures appear inherently morally superior. This reproduces white moral authority while pathologizing brown communities. It is also so important to keep in mind that people of color, especially marginalized or those with darker skin in general, are never seen or heard even in times when they deserve to be or need to. The manhwa makes this worse, as Ishikan also implies that he doesn't care if people call him barbaric, if people think he violated Leia, cause it must be his nature. Why change other people's idea of what could seem to be very true? Because predatory marriage perpetuates long-standing racial stereotypes that depict dark, South Asian, Arab, and Middle Eastern coded individuals as intrinsically dangerous, primitive, or less human. It is detrimental. Despite being fictional, the novel employs cliches that have traditionally been used to defend discrimination, colonial aggression, and social exclusion in the real world, such as animalization, barbarian stereotypes, exoticization, and cursed lineages. The story perpetuates a racial hierarchy in which whiteness or lightness is linked to order, morality, and civilization by portraying darker-skinned or culturally Eastern groups as threats and lighter-skinned characters as heroes. This deprives racialized figures of agency and transforms them from complete human beings into one-dimensional symbols of threat. Not even just fictional pieces, but even how we're portrayed on social media is horrid. I can't remember the last time I scrolled on TikTok on Tim Hortons, for example, without people spewing the most heinous racist shit against brown people or South Asians. Why do I have to worry about how I'm gonna get hate crimed anytime, anywhere? Why do I and multiple others of my kind have to just deal with it and try to ignore it. And when we're told to speak up or to try to do something about it, it's never easy. According to a UN woman-led study conducted across 5 nations, nearly 73% of them frequently come across stereotypes. However, just 30% of people regularly speak up when they witness it. Additionally, preconceptions based on race or ethnicity, 52%, and gender, 57%, were among the most often reported kinds. And honestly, when it is reported, nothing is really done about it. People will just say something like, "And the world kept spinning," or that, again, it's not that deep. If there's one big thing to take away from all this, it's that the public's perception of minorities is ultimately up to the media, which has the authority to choose who to represent and how to do so through editing, selection, and production. Beyond representation, this type of portrayal is important because, as criminology and cultural theory demonstrate, pop culture changes people's unconscious perceptions of who is dangerous, deserving of empathy, deserving of sympathy, and whose suffering is accepted. In real life, brown, South Asian, and Middle Eastern persons are more likely to be feared, policed, stereotyped, or dehumanized due to these fictitious caricatures that reinforce the same cultural prejudices that criminalize them. To put it another way, the harm goes beyond the fact that the manhwa is fictional or false. Rather, it perpetuates a broader cultural trend that views some racialized groups as intrinsically suspect while elevating lighter-skinned protagonists to moral authority. This dynamic perpetuates racial inequity, influences public opinion, and fuels prejudice and violence in the real world. Do I think this single piece of media, just this, is setting us back by how badly it stereotypes? No. I actually blame a lot of pieces of media for that, though. Do I fully think the author meant to be offensive? No. But this entire video should have explained enough why writers, artists, in fact anyone in general, should reflect and consider how it just might.